The bitter winds of November swept across the desolate plains of what would soon become the state of Ohio. In this remote frontier, where civilization barely touched the wilderness, stood the imposing Gothic structure of St. Eulalia Convent. Built from dark limestone quarried from the nearby hills, its towering spires pierced the grey sky like accusing fingers. The convent's architecture seemed deliberately designed to inspire both awe and unease. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the building, their stone faces twisted into expressions of eternal anguish. The windows were narrow slits that allowed little light to penetrate the interior, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight within the sacred walls. Iron bars, ostensibly for protection against wild animals, gave the structure the appearance of a fortress rather than a house of worship. The convent housed the austere Benedictine sisters, who had arrived 5 years earlier with a mission to bring God's word to the frontier. But isolation breeds strange customs, and in this forgotten corner of America, far from the oversight of any bishop or authority, the sisters had developed their own interpretation of divine will. The surrounding landscape only added to the sense of isolation. Miles of untamed wilderness stretched in every direction, broken only by the occasional homestead of hardy settlers who had ventured west in search of new opportunities. The nearest town, Millbrook, lay 15 miles to the east, a day's journey by wagon over treacherous roads that became impassable during the harsh winter months. 17-year-old Abigail Finch arrived at St. Eulalia's gates on a cold October morning, her meager possessions clutched in a worn carpet bag. An orphan from Philadelphia, she had been sent west by the Catholic orphanage after a generous donation from an anonymous benefactor paid for her passage and novice fees. Abigail's journey to the convent had taken 3 weeks, traveling by train to Cincinnati and then by wagon across the rough frontier roads. During the long journey, she had time to observe her fellow travelers, farmers, merchants, and other settlers heading west in search of new lives. She noticed how their conversations changed when they mentioned St. Eulalia, how their voices dropped to whispers, and their eyes took on a distant, troubled look. The wagon driver who brought her to the convent, a grizzled man named Samuel Porter, had been unusually quiet during the final miles of the journey. When Abigail asked him about the sisters, he had simply shaken his head and muttered something about strange goings-on before falling silent again. Abigail possessed a sharp mind and keen observational skills, traits that had often gotten her into trouble at the orphanage. She noticed details others missed, the way people's voices changed when they lied, how their eyes avoided certain topics, the small inconsistencies in their stories. At the Philadelphia orphanage, these skills had helped her navigate the complex social dynamics and avoid the worst punishments. She had learned to read the moods of the matrons, to anticipate their reactions, and to blend into the background when necessary. Her childhood had been marked by loss and uncertainty. Her parents had died in a cholera outbreak when she was 7, leaving her with no relatives willing to take her in. The orphanage had been her home for 10 years, a place where survival depended on intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to remain invisible when authority figures were in a bad mood. These skills would prove both blessing and curse in the days ahead. Mother Superior Helena commanded absolute respect throughout the territory. Local settlers spoke of her with reverence. She was known for her charitable works, her wisdom in settling disputes, and her ability to provide sanctuary for troubled souls. Even the Protestant farmers trusted her judgment and often sought her counsel on matters ranging from crop rotation to family disputes. A woman of imposing stature with steel-gray eyes, Mother Helena had founded the convent with her own inheritance, claiming divine guidance had led her to this specific location. She spoke with the refined accent of Boston society, and her knowledge of literature, medicine, and theology impressed even the most educated settlers in the region. The local community saw her as a beacon of civilization in the wilderness, never questioning her methods or the strict rules that governed life within the convent walls. When concerned parents occasionally inquired about their daughters who had been sent to St. Eulalia, Mother Helena would provide eloquent updates about their spiritual progress and their growing devotion to God's service. She had a remarkable ability to present herself as exactly what each person needed her to be. To the rough frontier farmers, she was a wise counselor who understood their struggles. To the few educated settlers, she was an intellectual equal who could discuss philosophy and theology. To worried parents, she was a caring maternal figure who would guide their daughters toward righteousness. The other sisters, 12 in total, moved through their daily routines with an unsettling uniformity. They spoke in whispers, kept their eyes downcast, and seemed to exist in a state of perpetual anxiety that the townspeople attributed to holy devotion and fear of God. When visitors came to the convent, these sisters would appear briefly to serve meals or perform other duties, but they never engaged in conversation beyond the most basic pleasantries. Their movements were synchronized in an almost mechanical way, as if they were following invisible choreography. They walked with identical postures, their hands clasped in the same position, their steps measured and precise. Even their facial expressions seemed rehearsed, displaying the same serene but vacant smile whenever they encountered outsiders. As Abigail crossed the threshold of St. Eulalia Convent, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was entering not a house of God, but a carefully constructed prison where something far more sinister than prayer took place behind those thick stone walls. The heavy wooden door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb being sealed, and she noticed that there were no handles on the inside, only smooth wood that offered no purchase for fingers desperate to escape. Tell me, dear viewer, from which state are you watching this story unfold? I'd love to know where my American audience is tuning in from as we dive deeper into this chilling tale from Ohio's dark past. Within her first week at St. Eulalia, Abigail witnessed what Mother Helena called the sacred ritual of purification, a monthly ceremony that the Mother Superior claimed was essential for maintaining the spiritual purity of the convent. The ritual was announced during evening prayers on the night of the new moon. Mother Helena would stand before the assembled sisters, her tall figure casting long shadows in the candlelight, and speak in solemn tones about the necessity of spiritual cleansing. She would quote obscure passages from medieval religious texts, describing how certain souls required deeper purification to combat the wilderness demons that plagued the frontier. "The devil finds fertile ground in the untamed wilderness," Mother Helena would intone, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "He sends his agents to corrupt the pure of heart, to plant seeds of doubt and rebellion in minds that should be devoted only to God's service. We must be vigilant, sisters. We must be willing to undergo whatever trials are necessary to maintain our spiritual purity." On the night of the new moon, Mother Helena would select one of the sisters for what she termed intensive spiritual cleansing. The selection process itself was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. Mother Helena would walk slowly among the kneeling sisters, her footsteps echoing in the chapel, pausing behind each woman for long, tension-filled moments. The chosen sister would be led to the convent's basement chapel, a cold stone chamber lit only by flickering candles. The basement had been carved directly into the bedrock beneath the convent, its walls weeping with moisture that created an atmosphere of damp, oppressive gloom. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone, not Christian crosses, but older, more primitive markings that seemed to writhe in the dancing candlelight. The townspeople knew of these rituals and praised Mother Helena's dedication to spiritual discipline. When they occasionally asked about the ceremonies, she would explain that certain souls required deeper purification to combat the wilderness demons that plagued the frontier. Her reputation was so sterling that no one questioned these practices. Local farmers would sometimes hear sounds echoing across the fields on ritual nights, low moaning that they attributed to wind through the stone corridors, or perhaps the prayers of devoted sisters engaged in intensive meditation. The sounds never lasted long enough to cause real concern, and Mother Helena's explanations were always so reasonable, so grounded in religious tradition, that doubt never took root in the community's collective mind. But Abigail noticed something that chilled her to the bone. Sister Margaret, a gentle woman in her 30s who had been kind to Abigail during her first days, was selected for the November purification ritual. Before the ceremony, Margaret had been vibrant, often humming hymns while working in the garden. She had a habit of sketching wildflowers in the margins of her prayer book and would share stories of her childhood in Boston, describing the bustling streets and the smell of fresh bread from her father's bakery. Margaret had arrived at St. Eulalia 6 months earlier, sent by her family after she had refused an arranged marriage to a much older widower. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, unusual aspirations for a woman of her time, and her family had hoped that religious life would cure her of such unwomanly ambitions. During their brief conversations, Margaret had confided in Abigail about her hopes of eventually being transferred to a convent in a larger city. where she might be able to teach children and use her education for God's service. Her eyes would light up when she spoke of her plans, and she would describe the books she hoped to read and the lessons she wanted to create. When Margaret emerged from the basement chapel the following morning, she was fundamentally changed. Her eyes held a vacant, haunted quality, staring straight ahead without seeming to focus on anything. She no longer hummed or sketched. The margins of her prayer book, once filled with delicate drawings of flowers and birds, remained blank. When Abigail tried to speak with her, Margaret would only respond with rehearsed phrases about accepting God's will and the necessity of sacrifice. The change was so complete and so sudden that it defied explanation. Margaret's voice had changed too. It was flatter, more monotone, as if all emotion had been drained from it. She moved differently, with mechanical precision, rather than the natural grace she had displayed before. Even her posture had changed. Where she had once stood straight with confidence, she now hunched slightly, as if trying to make herself invisible. Most disturbing of all, Margaret now bore a small, precise scar on her left wrist, barely visible unless one looked closely. The scar was perfectly straight, about an inch long, and appeared to have been made with a surgical instrument. When Abigail asked about it, Margaret's face went completely blank, as if she couldn't even comprehend the question. Her eyes would glaze over, and she would begin reciting prayers in Latin until the conversation ended. As weeks passed, Abigail began to notice a disturbing pattern that extended far beyond Margaret's transformation. Every sister who had undergone the purification ritual bore similar scars and displayed the same hollow, compliant behavior. They moved through their duties like sleepwalkers, their personalities seemingly erased and replaced with an eerie uniformity. Abigail started paying closer attention to the other sisters, studying their behavior and trying to piece together their histories. Sister Catherine, who had been purified in September, had once been known for her beautiful singing voice. The other sisters had told Abigail that Catherine used to lead the evening hymns with such passion that even the birds would fall silent to listen. Now Catherine's voice was barely audible during prayers, a whispered monotone that seemed to come from somewhere far away. Sister Anne, purified in August, had been the convent's librarian and teacher. Before her ritual, she had been eager to share her knowledge, helping the newer sisters with their Latin and explaining the meanings behind various religious ceremonies. After her purification, she could still perform her duties mechanically, but the spark of intellectual curiosity that had defined her was completely gone. When Abigail asked her about a particular book, Anne would stare blankly for several seconds before responding with a simple, "I don't know," and walking away. The pattern extended to their physical movements as well. All of the purified sisters walked with the same measured pace, held their hands in identical positions during prayer, and even seemed to breathe in unison during silent meditation. It was as if they had been programmed to move and respond in predetermined ways, their individual personalities completely subsumed by some kind of collective identity. Mother Helena would often praise these purified sisters to visiting townspeople, describing their transformation as evidence of divine grace. She would speak eloquently about how the ritual had freed them from the burdens of worldly concerns and selfish desires, allowing them to achieve a state of perfect spiritual submission. "See how peaceful they have become," Mother Helena would say, gesturing toward the silent sisters as they went about their duties. "They have learned to surrender their will completely to God's plan. They no longer struggle against His divine purpose, but accept whatever trials He sends them with perfect obedience." The community marveled at how peaceful and devoted these women had become, never suspecting that their spiritual leader was systematically destroying the minds and spirits of those under her care. The transformation was so complete and so seemingly positive from an outside perspective that it reinforced Mother Helena's reputation as a gifted spiritual guide. But Abigail could see what the townspeople missed. She noticed how the purified sisters never laughed, never showed surprise or curiosity, never displayed any emotion beyond a kind of vacant serenity. They were like beautiful dolls, perfectly crafted but utterly lifeless. As Abigail's observations became more systematic, she began to realize that Mother Helena was watching her with increasing intensity. The Mother Superior had an uncanny ability to appear wherever Abigail happened to be, always with some plausible reason for her presence, but clearly monitoring the young woman's behavior and interactions. During meals, Mother Helena would position herself where she could observe Abigail's conversations with the other sisters. During work periods, she would find excuses to check on whatever task Abigail had been assigned. Even during private prayer time, Abigail would sometimes catch glimpses of the Mother Superior's grey eyes, watching her from the shadows of the chapel. The surveillance was subtle but persistent, creating an atmosphere of constant tension. Abigail began to feel like a mouse being stalked by a cat, never knowing when the predator might decide to pounce. She started modifying her behavior, being more careful about what she said and how she reacted to the strange occurrences around the convent. But this caution only seemed to increase Mother Helena's interest. The Mother Superior began engaging Abigail in longer conversations, probing her thoughts and opinions on various subjects. These conversations had the veneer of spiritual guidance, but Abigail could sense an underlying current of evaluation, as if Mother Helena was assessing her for some unknown purpose. "Tell me, my dear," Mother Helena would say during these sessions, "what do you think of our little community here? Do you find the discipline challenging?" Some young women struggle with the transition from worldly concerns to spiritual devotion. Abigail learned to give carefully neutral responses, expressing gratitude for the opportunity to serve God, while avoiding any statements that might be interpreted as criticism or doubt. But she could see that Mother Helena was not fooled by her diplomatic answers. The older woman's eyes would narrow slightly, and a small smile would play at the corners of her mouth, as if she was enjoying a private joke. Abigail realized with growing horror that she was witnessing not religious devotion, but something far more sinister, a methodical process of psychological destruction disguised as holy ritual. And she knew it was only a matter of time before Mother Helena would select her for purification. The question that haunted her nights was simple yet terrifying. What exactly happened in that basement chapel, and how many women had already been broken on the altar of Mother Helena's twisted interpretation of divine will? Over the following weeks, Abigail began to systematically observe and document the horrifying pattern that governed life at St. Eulalia. She discovered that Mother Helena's selection process was far from random. It followed a calculated methodology that revealed the true scope of her psychological manipulation. The victims were always chosen based on specific criteria that became clearer with each passing day. They were either new arrivals like herself, sisters who showed signs of independent thinking, or those who had begun to question the increasingly harsh rules of convent life. Mother Helena had an uncanny ability to identify women who posed potential threats to her absolute authority, and she eliminated that threat through her purification process. Abigail noticed that the ritual occurred precisely every 28 days, always during the new moon when the convent was shrouded in complete darkness. The timing wasn't coincidental. It provided maximum psychological impact, while ensuring that any sounds from the basement chapel would be muffled by the thick stone walls and the absence of outside activity. But there were other patterns as well, subtler signs that revealed the methodical nature of Mother Helena's operation. The selected sisters were always isolated for several days before their purification, assigned to solitary tasks that kept them away from the other women. During this isolation period, their meals would be different, smaller portions that left them weakened and more susceptible to psychological manipulation. Mother Helena would also begin a process of what she called spiritual preparation during these days. The chosen sister would be required to spend additional hours in prayer and meditation, often in uncomfortable positions that created physical stress. Sleep would be restricted, with the sister required to wake for additional prayer sessions throughout the night. Using skills learned during her years at the Philadelphia orphanage, where keeping detailed records had been essential for survival, Abigail began maintaining a hidden journal. She concealed it within the binding of her prayer book, carefully removing several pages and creating a hollow space where she could hide her real observations. The journal was written in a code she had developed as a child, a mixture of shorthand, deliberately misspelled words, and symbols that would appear as innocent religious notes to any casual observer. She had learned this technique from an older girl at the orphanage, who had used coded messages to warn others about which matrons were in dangerous moods. Her entries revealed a chilling timeline that painted a picture of systematic psychological destruction. October 15th, Sister Margaret selected. Previously spoke of teaching dreams, refused arranged marriage, emerged changed, scar on left wrist. No longer draws or hums, responds only to direct orders. November 12th, Sister Catherine chosen. Previously questioned why we weren't allowed to receive mail from families, beautiful singing voice now reduced to whispers. Fresh scar matches Margaret's, seems to have no memory of her previous interests. December 10th, Sister Anne, taken for purification, had been teaching me Latin prayers, showed me books in the library, returned with same vacant expression and identical scarring, can still perform duties but shows no intellectual curiosity. When asked about books, stares blankly. Each entry included detailed observations about the women's personalities before and after their purification, creating an undeniable record of systematic psychological destruction. Abigail noted changes in speech patterns, body language, facial expressions, and responses to various stimuli. She also began documenting the physical environment of the convent, mapping the layout of the building, and noting which areas were off-limits to the sisters. She discovered that certain sections of the basement were always locked, and that Mother Helena carried a ring of keys that she never allowed anyone else to handle. As Abigail's investigation deepened, she made a startling discovery that would change everything. Hidden beneath the convent's main floor, accessible through a concealed entrance behind the altar, lay an extensive network of underground chambers that the townspeople knew nothing about. The discovery came by accident during her third week at the convent. While cleaning the chapel late one evening, Abigail had dropped her scrub brush, which rolled behind the altar. As she crawled to retrieve it, her hand pressed against what felt like a loose stone in the wall. When she pushed harder, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. These weren't the simple basement rooms that Mother Helena had described to the local community. Instead, they formed a complex maze of interconnected cells, each equipped with restraints, strange medical instruments, and detailed charts tracking the progress of various treatments. The main chamber was the size of a small church, with a vaulted ceiling supported by stone pillars. Along the walls were smaller rooms, each containing what appeared to be medical equipment, tables with leather straps, cabinets filled with bottles of unknown substances, and instruments that looked more suited to a surgeon's office than a religious institution. The walls were covered with Mother Helena's meticulous notes, written in Latin to prevent the sisters from understanding their contents. Abigail's limited knowledge of the language, taught to her by Sister Anne before her purification, allowed her to decipher fragments of these horrifying documents. The notes revealed that Mother Helena had been conducting what she called experiments in spiritual compliance, a systematic program of psychological torture designed to break down individual will and create perfectly obedient subjects. The scars weren't just marks of the ritual, they were deliberate wounds inflicted during sessions of prolonged psychological and physical abuse. One wall contained detailed anatomical drawings showing pressure points on the human body, with notes about which areas could be manipulated to cause maximum psychological distress without leaving visible marks. Another section included charts tracking the effects of various drugs and substances on the human nervous system. Most disturbing of all were the detailed case studies of individual sisters, documenting their personalities before treatment and tracking their transformation through various stages of psychological breakdown. Each file included photographs, a new technology that Mother Helena was using to document the physical and psychological changes in her victims. Through careful observation and her growing understanding of Mother Helena's methods, Abigail uncovered the true purpose behind the convent's establishment. The Mother Superior hadn't come to Ohio to spread God's word. She had come to create an isolated laboratory where she could perfect her techniques of mind control. The generous donations that funded the convent came from wealthy families back east who paid Mother Helena to reform their troublesome daughters, young women who had shown signs of independence, rebellion, or unconventional thinking. These families believed they were sending their daughters to a strict but legitimate religious institution. In reality, they were paying for their systematic psychological destruction. Abigail found correspondence hidden in Mother Helena's private chambers that revealed the full scope of the operation. Letters from prominent Boston and New York families described their daughters' problems in detail: refusal to accept arranged marriages, interest in education beyond what was considered appropriate for women, questioning of religious or social authority. The fees charged were substantial, enough to fund not just the convent's operations, but Mother Helena's plans for expansion. Each letter contained detailed instructions about what kind of reformation was desired, with some families requesting complete personality changes and others asking for more subtle modifications to their daughter's behavior. Mother Helena had chosen the Ohio frontier specifically because of its isolation and lack of oversight. Here, far from any episcopal authority or government supervision, she could operate with complete impunity. The local community's respect and trust provided the perfect cover for her activities. The purified sisters weren't just victims, they were proof of concept for Mother Helena's methods. She planned to expand her operation, establishing similar convents throughout the frontier territories, where desperate families would pay handsomely to have their difficult daughters transformed into compliant, broken shells of their former selves. Abigail's investigation revealed that Mother Helena's operation was far more extensive than anyone could have imagined. Hidden in the Mother Superior's private chambers, she discovered correspondence with wealthy families from Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, all inquiring about sending their daughters to St. Eulalia for spiritual guidance. The letters revealed a sophisticated network of referrals, with satisfied customers recommending Mother Helena's services to other families struggling with willful daughters. The testimonials were glowing, praising the complete transformation of young women who had once been difficult and rebellious. One letter from a Boston merchant described his daughter's transformation. "When we sent Elizabeth to you, she was headstrong and defiant, refusing to accept her proper role in society. She returned to us as a model of feminine virtue, obedient and compliant in all things. We cannot thank you enough for the miracle you have worked." Another letter from a New York banker included a substantial payment and a request for similar treatment for his youngest daughter. "Margaret has become infected with dangerous ideas about women's education and independence. We trust that your methods will cure her of these unwomanly notions and restore her to proper Christian submission." The fees were substantial, enough to fund not just the convent's operations, but Mother Helena's plans for expansion. Each letter contained detailed descriptions of the young women's problems, their refusal to accept arranged marriages, their interest in education beyond what was considered appropriate for women, their questioning of religious or social authority. These weren't troubled girls in need of help. They were intelligent, independent young women whose families saw their strength as a disease to be cured. The correspondence revealed a systematic effort to eliminate female independence and intelligence, replacing it with mindless obedience to male authority. What do you think, viewers? Have you ever encountered someone in a position of authority who used their reputation and religious or moral standing to hide their true nature? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who wear the mask of righteousness. Abigail's investigation became increasingly sophisticated as she learned to navigate the dangerous environment of the convent. She developed a system of observation that allowed her to gather information without arousing suspicion, using her assigned duties as cover for her real activities. During her work in the laundry, she would carefully examine the clothing of the purified sisters, looking for additional evidence of their treatment. She found that their undergarments often bore small stains that looked like blood, and their dresses showed signs of having been torn and mended. While working in the kitchen, she observed the different meals prepared for different sisters. The women selected for purification received food that had been treated with substances that made them drowsy and compliant. Abigail tested small amounts of these substances on herself and found that they caused disorientation and memory problems. Her duties cleaning the chapel gave her access to Mother Helena's private office, where she was able to photograph documents using a small camera she had constructed from materials found around the convent. The photographs provided irrefutable evidence of the systematic abuse taking place within the walls of St. Eulalia. Most importantly, Abigail began interviewing the purified sisters during moments when Mother Helena was absent. Through patient questioning and careful observation, she discovered that their conditioning wasn't perfect. Deep in their minds, fragments of their original personalities remained, buried beneath layers of psychological manipulation. Sister Margaret, during a brief moment of clarity, whispered to Abigail about the room with the white walls and the woman who asks questions that hurt your head. Sister Catherine, when she thought no one was listening, would sometimes hum fragments of the songs she had once loved, her voice breaking with suppressed emotion. These glimpses of the women they had once been provided Abigail with crucial information about Mother Helena's methods and gave her hope that the damage might not be completely irreversible. As December progressed and the winter deepened, Abigail realized that her time was running out. Mother Helena had begun watching her more closely, and she had overheard conversations suggesting that she would be selected for the next purification ritual. The signs were unmistakable. Her meals had begun to include the same substances that were given to other sisters before their selection. Her duties had been changed to more isolated tasks that kept her away from the other women. Most ominously, Mother Helena had begun the spiritual preparation sessions, requiring Abigail to spend additional hours in prayer and meditation. But Abigail had advantages that the previous victims had lacked. Her years in the orphanage had taught her to be resourceful and suspicious of authority figures who claimed to have her best interests at heart. More importantly, she had documented everything, creating a record that could expose Mother Helena's crimes to the outside world. She began preparing for escape, carefully studying the convent's routines and identifying the best opportunities to flee. The winter weather made escape more dangerous, but it also provided cover for her movements and reduced the likelihood of pursuit. Abigail created multiple copies of her evidence, hiding them in different locations throughout the convent. She also prepared a detailed map of the underground chambers and wrote out explicit instructions for anyone who might follow in her footsteps. But she knew that simply running away wouldn't be enough. The other sisters, those who hadn't yet been purified, would remain trapped, and new victims would continue to arrive. The families sending their daughters to St. Eulalia had no idea what was really happening, and Mother Helena's reputation would allow her to continue her operations indefinitely. Abigail made a decision that would require tremendous courage. She would gather irrefutable evidence of Mother Helena's crimes and find a way to expose the truth to the authorities. It was a dangerous plan that could cost her everything, but it was the only way to ensure that the horrors of St. Eulalia would finally come to an end. The question was whether she could execute her plan before Mother Helena decided that the time had come for Abigail's own purification. On the night of December 28, 1850, as a fierce blizzard raged across the Ohio frontier, Abigail made her move. She had carefully observed that Mother Helena always spent the hours before each purification ritual in deep meditation in her private chambers, leaving the underground complex temporarily unguarded. The storm provided perfect cover for her activities. The howling wind masked any sounds she might make, and the driving snow ensured that no one would venture outside to observe her movements. The convent felt like a ship adrift in a sea of white chaos, isolated from the rest of the world. Using a key she had carefully copied from Sister Margaret's ring during the woman's post-purification stupor, Abigail descended into the hidden chambers beneath St. Eulalia. The narrow staircase was treacherous in the darkness, each step threatening to send her tumbling into the abyss below. The air grew colder as she descended, carrying with it the smell of damp stone and something else, something that reminded her of the medical ward at the Philadelphia orphanage. What she discovered there would haunt her for the rest of her life. The main underground room served as Mother Helena's private study and laboratory. The walls were lined with detailed medical charts, tracking each victim's progress through various stages of psychological breakdown. But these weren't the crude notes of a religious fanatic. They were the methodical observations of someone with sophisticated knowledge of human psychology and physiology. The room was larger than Abigail had imagined, with multiple chambers branching off from the central area. Each chamber served a specific purpose in Mother Helena's systematic program of psychological destruction. One room contained what appeared to be a medical examination table, complete with leather restraints and an array of surgical instruments. Another held shelves lined with bottles containing various substances, some labeled with medical terms, others marked only with cryptic symbols. The walls were covered with anatomical drawings showing the human nervous system, with detailed notes about which areas could be manipulated to cause specific psychological effects. Charts tracked the effects of various drugs and treatments on different personality types, with meticulous records of dosages, timing, and results. Most disturbing of all were the photographs. Mother Helena had documented every stage of each victim's transformation, creating a visual record of systematic psychological destruction. The before and after images were stark evidence of what was being done to these women, the light in their eyes gradually dimming until nothing remained but vacant compliance. Abigail discovered that Mother Helena wasn't just a corrupt religious leader. She was a trained physician who had been expelled from medical practice in Boston for conducting unauthorized experiments on patients at a women's asylum. She had assumed the identity of a nun and fled west to continue her work without oversight. The purification rituals were actually systematic programs of psychological torture, combining sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, drug administration, and carefully calibrated physical abuse to break down the victim's sense of self and replace it with complete dependence on Mother Helena's approval. Hidden in a locked drawer, Abigail found Mother Helena's personal journal, a detailed manifesto outlining her beliefs and long-term goals. The document revealed the true scope of her ambitions and the twisted ideology that drove her actions. The journal was written in Mother Helena's precise handwriting, each page filled with carefully reasoned arguments for what she saw as necessary social reform. She believed that women's independence was a form of mental illness that could be cured through proper treatment. She saw herself as a pioneer in what she called corrective psychology, developing techniques that could transform any strong-willed woman into a perfectly compliant domestic servant. The modern woman has been corrupted by dangerous ideas about equality and independence, one entry read. These notions are contrary to natural law and divine will. A woman's proper role is submission to male authority, first to her father, then to her husband. Any deviation from this natural order creates psychological disturbance that manifests as rebellion, willfulness, and other unwomanly behaviors. Mother Helena's ultimate goal was to establish a network of treatment centers disguised as religious institutions throughout the American frontier. She envisioned a future where families could send their difficult daughters to be reformed and returned as ideal wives and mothers, completely stripped of any desire for independence or self-determination. The journal contained detailed plans for expansion, including correspondence with potential investors and locations for new facilities. Mother Helena had already begun training selected purified sisters to serve as assistants in future operations, creating a self-perpetuating system of abuse. The frontier provides the perfect laboratory for this work, another entry explained. Here, far from the interference of government authorities or church hierarchy, we can perfect our methods and demonstrate their effectiveness. Once the techniques are proven, we can expand to more populated areas, eventually transforming the entire character of American womanhood. But the most damning evidence lay in Mother Helena's meticulous records of her experiments. She had documented every aspect of each victim's treatment, including detailed notes on which techniques were most effective for different personality types. The records revealed that several sisters had died during the purification process, victims whose minds had been so thoroughly shattered that they had lost the will to live. Mother Helena had disposed of their bodies in a hidden section of the convent cemetery, listing their deaths in official records as consumption or fever. Abigail found photographs, a new technology that Mother Helena used to document the physical and psychological transformation of her victims. The before and after images were stark evidence of the systematic destruction of human dignity and autonomy. One file contained the complete case history of a young woman named Sarah Whitmore, who had been sent to the convent by her family in 1848. Sarah had been an aspiring writer who had refused to abandon her literary ambitions for marriage. The photographs showed her transformation from a vibrant, intelligent young woman to a hollow-eyed automaton who could barely speak above a whisper. The final entry in Sarah's file was chilling in its clinical detachment. Subject expired during final treatment session. Psychological resistance proved stronger than anticipated, resulting in complete mental collapse. Body disposed of in Section C of cemetery. Family notified of death by consumption. Lessons learned will be applied to future subjects. As Abigail studied the documents, she began to understand the full horror of Mother Helena's methods. The purification process was actually a carefully designed program of psychological torture that unfolded over several weeks. The process began with isolation and sensory deprivation. The selected victim would be confined to a small, windowless cell in the underground complex with minimal food and water. The cell was kept in complete darkness, except for brief periods when Mother Helena would appear with a single candle, creating a powerful psychological association between light and her presence. During these visits, Mother Helena would engage in what she called cognitive restructuring, a process of systematic questioning designed to undermine the victim's sense of self and reality. She would challenge every aspect of the woman's identity, beliefs, and memories, gradually convincing her that her previous life had been a delusion. The physical abuse was carefully calibrated to maximize psychological impact while minimizing visible damage. Mother Helena used techniques she had learned during her medical training to inflict pain without leaving permanent marks, except for the deliberate scarring that served as a mark of ownership. The final stage involved what Mother Helena called reconstruction, the process of building a new personality based on complete submission to authority. The victim would be gradually reintroduced to the convent community, but only after her original personality had been completely destroyed and replaced with a carefully programmed set of responses. As Abigail gathered the evidence, she heard footsteps on the stairs above. Mother Helena had discovered her absence and come looking for her. There was no escape route from the underground chambers. Abigail was trapped with the evidence of the Mother Superior's crimes. The footsteps descended slowly, deliberately, each step echoing off the stone walls like a death knell. Abigail quickly gathered as many documents as she could carry, stuffing them inside her dress and praying that Mother Helena wouldn't notice the bulge they created. Mother Helena appeared at the bottom of the stairs, carrying a lantern that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Her face was calm, but her eyes blazed with cold fury. For the first time, Abigail saw the woman without her mask of religious authority, the calculating predator who had perfected the art of psychological manipulation. "I'd hoped you would prove more amenable to guidance, my dear," Mother Helena said in her cultured Boston accent, her voice echoing strangely in the stone chamber. "But I see that you suffer from the same affliction as the others, an excess of curiosity and independence that must be corrected." She moved closer, and Abigail could see that she carried something in her other hand, a small leather case containing the instruments she used in her treatments. The sight of those tools, gleaming in the lantern light, sent a chill of terror through Abigail's body. "You've seen my work," Mother Helena continued, setting the lantern on a nearby table and opening the leather case with practiced efficiency. "You understand now that what I do here is necessary. These young women come to me broken by their own willfulness, and I heal them. I give them peace, purpose, and the ability to find happiness in submission to proper authority." Her voice took on the tone of a teacher, explaining a complex concept to a slow student. "The process is unpleasant, I admit, but the results speak for themselves. Look at Sister Margaret, Sister Catherine, Sister Anne. They are at peace now, free from the torment of their own rebellious thoughts. They have found true happiness in surrender." Abigail backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber was a dead end, and Mother Helena stood between her and the only exit. The older woman's eyes never left her face, studying her reactions with the detached interest of a scientist observing a laboratory specimen. "You have a choice, my dear," Mother Helena said, selecting an instrument from her case, a thin, sharp blade that caught the light like a serpent's fang. "You can submit willingly to the treatment, or you can resist and make the process more difficult. Either way, you will be purified. The only question is how much suffering you wish to endure first." But Abigail had one advantage that Mother Helena hadn't anticipated. During her weeks of observation, she had noticed that the underground chambers had a second exit, a tunnel that led to the old root cellar behind the convent's kitchen. The entrance was concealed behind a false wall that Mother Helena used to move victims in and out without being seen by the other sisters. As Mother Helena approached, confident that her victim was trapped, Abigail suddenly bolted toward the hidden passage. She had memorized its location during her earlier explorations, and her smaller size allowed her to move quickly through the narrow tunnel. The passage was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, and the walls were slick with moisture and ice. Abigail scraped her hands and knees on the rough stone as she scrambled through the darkness, driven by pure terror and the knowledge that capture meant a fate worse than death. Behind her, Mother Helena's shouts of rage echoed through the tunnel, followed by the sound of pursuit. But the older woman's larger frame made it difficult for her to follow quickly, and Abigail's desperation gave her speed that her pursuer couldn't match. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, a nightmare passage through the bowels of the earth. Abigail's lungs burned from the effort of crawling through the confined space, and her hands were numb with cold by the time she finally saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. She emerged into the root cellar just as the blizzard reached its peak intensity. The storm that raged around St. Eulalia that night seemed to mirror the chaos that was about to engulf the carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation that Mother Helena had built on the Ohio frontier. Mother Helena's voice could still be heard echoing from the tunnel behind her, promising terrible retribution for this act of defiance. But Abigail was already pushing through the cellar door into the howling wind and driving snow, clutching the stolen evidence against her chest like a lifeline. The night was so dark and the snow so thick that she could barely see her own hands in front of her face. But she knew that somewhere out there, beyond the walls of St. Eulalia, lay the possibility of justice for the women who had suffered under Mother Helena's systematic abuse. Her escape was only the beginning. Now she had to find a way to expose the truth and ensure that Mother Helena's reign of terror would finally end. Through the howling blizzard, Abigail struggled toward the nearest settlement, a small farming community 5 miles from the convent. The stolen documents, wrapped in her cloak, represented the only hope of justice for the women who had suffered under Mother Helena's systematic abuse. The storm was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The wind cut through her thin convent dress like knives of ice, and the snow was so thick that she could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. Several times she became disoriented and had to use the faint glow from the convent's windows to reorient herself. Behind her, she could see torches moving through the darkness as Mother Helena organized a search party. The Mother Superior had convinced the remaining sisters that Abigail had suffered a mental breakdown and fled into the storm, and that they needed to find her before she froze to death. The irony wasn't lost on Abigail. The woman who had systematically destroyed so many minds was now claiming to be concerned about her mental health. The journey that should have taken 2 hours stretched into an agonizing ordeal that lasted most of the night. Abigail's feet went numb first, then her hands, making it increasingly difficult to maintain her grip on the precious evidence. Several times she stumbled and fell, the documents scattering in the snow, forcing her to crawl around in the darkness to gather them again. As dawn approached, the storm began to weaken, and Abigail could finally see the smoke rising from the chimney of the Whitman farmhouse. She had made it, but barely. Her lips were blue with cold, and she could no longer feel her extremities. The last 100 yards to the farmhouse door were covered on hands and knees, her strength finally giving out just as she reached safety. Abigail reached the farm of Thomas and Mary Whitman just as dawn was breaking. The Whitmans were among the few settlers who had always felt uneasy about the convent, though they had never been able to articulate why. Thomas Whitman served as the local justice of the peace, and his wife Mary had been one of the few people to notice that letters sent to the sisters at St. Eulalia never seemed to reach their intended recipients. Mary Whitman found Abigail collapsed on their doorstep when she went out to collect eggs from the chicken coop. The young woman was barely conscious, her clothes frozen to her body and her skin dangerously pale from exposure. Mary immediately brought her inside and began the process of warming her slowly to prevent shock. As Abigail recovered by the fire, wrapped in warm blankets and sipping hot broth, she began to tell her story. At first, the Whitmans were skeptical. The tale seemed too fantastic to believe. Mother Helena was respected throughout the community, and the idea that she was conducting psychological experiments on the sisters seemed impossible. But when Abigail produced the documents she had stolen from the underground chambers, their skepticism quickly turned to horror. The photographs, medical records, and detailed notes painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse disguised as religious practice. Thomas Whitman had served as a military officer before settling in Ohio, and he understood the importance of documentation in building a legal case. He immediately recognized that Abigail had gathered enough evidence to expose Mother Helena's crimes and bring her to justice. "This is evidence of crimes against humanity," he said, studying the photographs with growing revulsion. "This woman has been conducting medical experiments on human subjects without their consent. She's been torturing these women under the guise of religious practice." Mary Whitman was particularly affected by the before and after photographs of the victims. As a woman herself, she could imagine the horror of having one's personality systematically destroyed and replaced with mindless compliance. "We have to stop her," Mary said, her voice shaking with emotion. "How many more women will suffer if we don't act now?" Within hours, Thomas Whitman had organized a group of local men to investigate the convent. The group included the town doctor, the sheriff from the county seat, and several prominent farmers who had always harbored doubts about Mother Helena's operation. They arrived at St. Eulalia to find Mother Helena calmly conducting morning prayers, expressing concern for poor Abigail's mental state and suggesting that the harsh frontier life had proven too much for the young woman's delicate constitution. "I fear the isolation and discipline of religious life proved too challenging for her," Mother Helena explained to the assembled men, her voice filled with apparent compassion. She began showing signs of mental disturbance several days ago, talking to herself, making wild accusations, displaying paranoid behavior. I was preparing to send her back to her family for proper medical care when she fled into the storm. Her performance was masterful, combining just the right amount of concern, authority, and regret. She spoke of Abigail's delusions with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years manipulating others' perceptions of reality. But when confronted with the evidence that Abigail had gathered, Mother Helena's facade finally cracked. The underground chambers, the medical equipment, the detailed records of psychological torture, all of it painted an undeniable picture of systematic abuse, disguised as religious practice. The men who had come to investigate were hardened frontier settlers, accustomed to violence and hardship, but what they found beneath St. Eulalia shook them to their core. The systematic nature of the abuse, the clinical detachment of the records, the evidence of multiple deaths, it was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Dr. Samuel Morrison, who had accompanied the group, was particularly horrified by the medical equipment and drug supplies. "This isn't the work of a religious fanatic," he said, examining the surgical instruments. "This is the work of someone with sophisticated medical training who has perverted their knowledge for evil purposes." The purified sisters, when questioned gently by Mary Whitman, began to remember fragments of their experiences. The psychological conditioning that Mother Helena had imposed wasn't perfect, and with patient encouragement, some of the women were able to recall details of their treatment. Sister Margaret, speaking in halting whispers, described being kept in darkness for days at a time, with Mother Helena appearing periodically to ask questions that made her head hurt. She remembered being given substances that made her feel disconnected from her own thoughts and memories. Sister Catherine recalled being told repeatedly that her previous life had been a delusion, that her memories of family and friends were false constructs created by her diseased mind. The constant repetition of these ideas, combined with physical discomfort and isolation, had gradually worn down her resistance. Sister Anne, the former librarian, was able to provide the most detailed account. Her education had given her a framework for understanding what had been done to her, and she described a systematic process of psychological destruction that matched the records found in Mother Helena's files. "She would ask me questions about my past, then tell me that my answers were wrong," Anne explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "She said that my memories of teaching, of reading books, of having opinions about things, she said all of that was evidence of mental illness. She said that healthy women didn't think such thoughts." The process had been gradual but relentless. Day by day, Mother Helena had chipped away at Anne's sense of self until she began to doubt her own memories and experiences. The combination of physical discomfort, isolation, and constant psychological pressure had eventually broken down her resistance. "I began to believe her," Anne admitted, tears streaming down her face. "I began to think that maybe I was sick, that maybe my desire to teach and learn was wrong. She made me grateful when she told me I was getting better, when she said I was learning to be a proper woman." The investigation revealed that Mother Helena's operation was part of a larger network of similar institutions operating throughout the frontier territories. Her correspondence led authorities to other convents and reform schools, where wealthy families had sent their daughters for correction. Federal marshals were dispatched to investigate these facilities, leading to the exposure of what newspapers would later call the most extensive case of systematic abuse in the nation's history. Dozens of women were rescued from similar institutions, and several other operators of these facilities were arrested and prosecuted. The network had been operating for over a decade, with Mother Helena serving as both a practitioner and a teacher of psychological manipulation techniques. She had trained other operators in her methods, creating a system that could have continued indefinitely, if not for Abigail's courage in exposing the truth. The investigation revealed that the network had processed hundreds of young women, transforming them from independent, intelligent individuals into compliant domestic servants. The families who had paid for these services were horrified to learn what had actually been done to their daughters. Many of the families had genuinely believed they were helping their daughters by sending them to these institutions. The operators had been skilled at presenting themselves as legitimate religious and educational authorities, and their success stories, the reformed daughters who returned home as model wives and mothers, had provided powerful testimonials for their methods. Mother Helena was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault, false imprisonment, fraud, and murder. Her trial became a sensation, drawing attention from newspapers across the country and sparking a national conversation about the treatment of women and the dangers of unregulated institutions. During the trial, it was revealed that Mother Helena's real name was Dr. Margaret Thornfield, and that she had been conducting similar experiments for over a decade. Her medical training had been legitimate, but she had been expelled from practice after patients at a Boston asylum had died under suspicious circumstances. The trial testimony was harrowing. Victim after victim took the stand to describe their experiences under Mother Helena's care. The prosecution presented the photographs, medical records, and detailed documentation that Abigail had risked her life to obtain. Mother Helena's defense attempted to portray her as a misguided but well-intentioned reformer who had been trying to help troubled young women. Her lawyers argued that the harsh frontier environment had driven her to extreme measures, and that her methods, while unorthodox, had been motivated by genuine concern for her patients' welfare, but the evidence was overwhelming. The systematic nature of the abuse, the detailed records of psychological torture, the evidence of multiple deaths, all of it painted a picture of calculated evil disguised as religious charity. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Mother Helena was sentenced to life imprisonment, though many in the courtroom felt that even this punishment was insufficient for the magnitude of her crimes. The convent building itself was demolished by order of the territorial government, its dark stones scattered and buried to prevent the site from becoming a macabre tourist attraction. The land was donated to the local community for use as a school, a fitting transformation from a place of psychological destruction to one of genuine education and enlightenment. A memorial was erected to honor the women who had died under Mother Helena's care, and their names were read aloud at the dedication ceremony. The memorial bore a simple inscription, "In memory of those who suffered in silence, and in honor of those who found the courage to speak truth to power." The ceremony was attended by survivors from across the country, women who had been rescued from similar institutions as the network was exposed and dismantled. Many of them spoke publicly for the first time about their experiences, their voices growing stronger as they realized they were no longer alone. Sister Margaret, whose transformation Abigail had first witnessed, slowly began to recover fragments of her original personality. The process was difficult and incomplete. The psychological damage inflicted by Mother Helena could never be fully undone, but with patience and support, she was able to reclaim some of who she had been. "I remember drawing flowers," she said during one of the memorial services, her voice still soft but no longer vacant. "I remember the smell of my father's bakery. I remember wanting to teach children. She tried to take all of that away from me, but it's still here, buried deep but still here." The St. Eulalia case had far-reaching consequences for American society. It exposed the dangers of unregulated institutions and the ways in which religious authority could be used to mask criminal behavior. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of women in a society that often viewed independence and intelligence as character flaws to be corrected. The scandal led to increased scrutiny of similar institutions and helped fuel the growing women's rights movement. Many of the survivors of Mother Helena's abuse became advocates for reform, using their experiences to educate others about the warning signs of institutional abuse. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the leading voices in the women's rights movement, wrote extensively about the St. Eulalia case in her newspaper, The Revolution. She argued that the systematic abuse of women in these institutions was a natural consequence of a society that viewed female independence as a disease to be cured. "The horrors of St. Eulalia are not an aberration," Stanton wrote. "They are the logical extreme of a system that teaches women to distrust their own minds, to surrender their will to male authority, and to find their highest purpose in submission and compliance. Until we recognize women as full human beings, with the right to think, choose, and act for themselves, such atrocities will continue to occur." The case also led to significant legal reforms. Congress passed legislation requiring federal oversight of institutions that housed vulnerable populations, and many states enacted similar laws at the local level. The regulations required regular inspections, mandatory reporting of deaths and injuries, and strict limits on the use of isolation and physical restraint. Abigail Finch became a powerful advocate for women's rights and institutional reform. Her experience at St. Eulalia had transformed her from a frightened orphan into a fierce defender of the vulnerable and oppressed. She used her story to help other survivors of abuse and worked with lawmakers to establish regulations governing religious and educational institutions. Her testimony before Congress was particularly powerful. Standing before a room full of male legislators, many of whom had initially been skeptical of her claims, she presented the evidence she had gathered with calm, methodical precision. "Gentlemen," she said, holding up one of Mother Helena's photographs, "this is what happens when we allow institutions to operate without oversight, when we trust authority figures simply because they claim to represent God or moral virtue." This young woman was someone's daughter, someone's sister. She had dreams, hopes, aspirations. All of that was systematically destroyed by a woman who used religious authority to mask her crimes. Her work led to the establishment of the National Association for Institutional Reform, an organization dedicated to monitoring conditions in asylums, orphanages, and other institutions housing vulnerable populations. The association's investigators, many of them survivors of institutional abuse, conducted regular inspections and published reports that helped prevent future atrocities. Abigail also became a sought-after speaker at women's rights conventions, where she argued that the systematic oppression of women's minds was as serious a crime as any physical violence. Her speeches were powerful, not just because of what she had endured, but because of her ability to articulate the broader implications of her experience. "They tried to convince me that my thoughts were wrong, that my desire for independence was a sickness to be cured," she would tell audiences. "But our thoughts, our dreams, our aspirations, these are what make us human. When we allow others to control our minds, we cease to exist as individuals and become nothing more than puppets dancing to someone else's tune." The investigation into Mother Helena's network continued for years after her conviction. Federal marshals and local authorities worked together to track down other operators and rescue additional victims. The scope of the network was staggering. Investigators eventually identified more than 30 similar institutions operating across the frontier territories. Each facility followed the same basic model: a respected authority figure, usually claiming religious or medical credentials, would establish an institution in an isolated location where they could operate without oversight. Wealthy families would pay substantial fees to have their difficult daughters reformed, never suspecting that they were actually paying for systematic psychological torture. The operators had developed sophisticated methods for maintaining their facades of respectability. They cultivated relationships with local communities, provided charitable services, and carefully managed their public images. Many had legitimate credentials and backgrounds that made their claims of expertise credible. But beneath the surface, they were all conducting variations of the same horrific experiments in mind control. The techniques varied from institution to institution, but the goal was always the same: to break down individual will and replace it with mindless compliance. The investigation revealed that the network had been operating as a kind of informal research consortium, with operators sharing information about effective techniques and comparing results. Mother Helena had been one of the most successful practitioners, and her methods had been adopted by institutions across the country. As the network was exposed and dismantled, hundreds of survivors came forward to tell their stories. Each account was unique, but common themes emerged that painted a picture of systematic psychological abuse disguised as moral or medical treatment. Many of the women had been sent to these institutions by families who genuinely believed they were helping their daughters. The problems that had led to their institutionalization were often nothing more than normal expressions of intelligence and independence: refusing arranged marriages, expressing interest in education or careers, questioning religious or social authority. Sarah Whitmore's sister, Elizabeth, had been searching for her since Sarah's supposed death from consumption in 1848. When the St. Eulalia investigation revealed that Sarah had actually died during one of Mother Helena's treatments, Elizabeth became one of the most vocal advocates for justice. "My sister was a brilliant writer," Elizabeth testified during one of the trials. She had published several stories in literary magazines and was working on a novel. "Our parents sent her to St. Eulalia because they thought her literary ambitions were unwomanly. They believed that Mother Helena would cure her of these dangerous ideas and help her become a proper wife and mother. Instead, they paid for her murder. Another survivor, Rebecca Morrison, had been sent to a similar institution in Colorado after refusing to marry a man chosen by her father. She described a systematic process of psychological torture that had lasted for months. "They told me that my refusal to marry was evidence of mental illness," Rebecca explained. "They said that normal women were grateful for the protection and guidance of men, and that my desire for independence proved that my mind was diseased. They used isolation, drugs, and constant psychological pressure to try to break my will." Rebecca had been one of the fortunate ones. She had been rescued when federal marshals raided the Colorado facility, but the psychological scars remained, and she struggled for years to rebuild her sense of self and trust in her own judgment. The story of Saint Eulalia serves as a stark reminder that evil often hides behind masks of respectability and religious authority. Mother Helena's ability to maintain her facade for so long was possible only because the community trusted her reputation rather than investigating her methods. The case demonstrates the importance of questioning authority, especially when that authority operates in isolation and without oversight. It also shows the power of documentation and evidence in exposing systematic abuse, and the courage required to speak truth to power. Most importantly, the story of Abigail Finch and the other survivors reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, human resilience and the pursuit of justice can triumph over systematic oppression. Their courage in exposing the truth ensured that Mother Helena's reign of terror would end and that future generations of women would be protected from similar abuse. The legacy of Saint Eulalia is not just a tale of horror, but a testament to the power of one person's determination to expose the truth and protect others from harm. In a time when women had few rights and little voice in society, Abigail Finch's courage helped change the course of history and protect countless others from suffering the same fate. The reforms that followed the Saint Eulalia scandal helped establish the principle that no institution, regardless of its claimed moral or religious authority, should be allowed to operate without oversight and accountability. The regulations put in place after the scandal became the foundation for modern standards of institutional care and helped prevent similar atrocities from occurring. But perhaps the most important legacy of Saint Eulalia was the message it sent to future generations. That individual courage and determination can overcome even the most systematic forms of oppression, and that the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, will eventually come to light. The women who suffered under Mother Helena's care were not forgotten. Their stories became part of the historical record, their experiences helping to educate future generations about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. The story of the Saint Eulalia Convent reminds us that throughout history, those who seek to control and manipulate others often use positions of trust and authority to hide their true intentions. Whether in religious institutions, schools, or other organizations, the warning signs are often the same: isolation from outside oversight, demands for absolute obedience, and the systematic breaking down of individual identity and independence. As we reflect on this dark chapter from America's past, we must remember that vigilance and courage are required to protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. The story of Abigail Finch shows us that even one person, armed with determination and evidence, can expose systematic abuse and bring justice to those who have suffered in silence. In our modern world, we must continue to question authority, demand transparency from institutions, and listen to those who speak out against abuse. Only by remaining vigilant can we ensure that the horrors of places like Saint Eulalia never happen again. The courage of Abigail Finch and the other survivors of Mother Helena's abuse reminds us that the human spirit, no matter how brutally suppressed, can never be completely destroyed. Their determination to expose the truth and seek justice not only ended their own suffering, but protected countless others from experiencing the same fate. Their legacy lives on in the institutions and laws that were established to prevent such abuses, and in the ongoing fight for human dignity and the right of every individual to think, choose, and live according to their own conscience. What did you think of this chilling tale from America's frontier past? The story of Saint Eulalia Convent shows us how easily trust can be manipulated and how important it is to question authority, especially when it operates without oversight. The courage of Abigail Finch reminds us that one person with determination and evidence can expose even the most carefully hidden crimes and bring justice to those who have suffered in silence. If this story moved you or made you think about the importance of protecting vulnerable people from institutional abuse, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from American history. Your support helps us continue to bring these important historical lessons to light. What other dark chapters from America's past would you like us to explore? Have you ever encountered situations where authority figures used their position to hide wrongdoing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us create content that matters to you. Remember to hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories, and share this video with others who appreciate powerful historical narratives. Together we can ensure that the lessons of the past continue to guide us toward a more just and vigilant future.